This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. It's been a while, but I'm joined by Jill Bucaro from Wellness Riot, who is joining us. Where are you right now, Jill? Have you moved on since the last time we spoke?
I think I'm still in Missouri, which is, well, I am in Missouri.
Well, I was about to say, you don't know where you are.
I think that's where I was the last time, so I am here still, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a couple of months, and today we are here to speak all about chocolate. Chocolate. Now, I don't have a sweet tooth, but I am kind of partial to a little bit of chocolate in the morning with my cup of tea. But let's start from the very basics. What is chocolate? It may seem like a very simple question, but chocolate means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
It does. And I think what we think of chocolate is much different than maybe what it actually is. Mm-hmm. So maybe, we've heard of like the cacao bean or the cocoa bean, but chocolate's actually a fruit. So the fruit or the pods of the cacao tree contain brown seeds called cacao or cocoa. And chocolate or cacao can come in a bunch of different forms. We've maybe seen it as like powder, nibs, cacao nibs. It can be roasted, raw, cacao butter, paste. And the difference between, so a lot of people are like cacao, cocoa, like, are you just saying it in a weird way or just trying to be fancy? But there is a difference. So cacao refers to the beans that have not been roasted, whereas cocoa is made from beans that have been roasted. So there is a difference in the cacao or cocoa. We're not just trying to be fancy when we say cacao. Right. And then, cocoa butter or cacao butter. A lot of us have heard of that or maybe seen it. Like that's kind of that, it's the edible fat that's extracted from the cocoa bean. And it kind of gives that like silky mouth feel to chocolate. So it's actually beige, kind of like a pale yellow. So a lot, if you haven't seen it, we all think of chocolate as like this brown, but this cocoa butter is actually like this pale yellow. And it's used, to make chocolate as well as like things like ointments and toiletries and pharmaceuticals and all that kind of stuff. So that's, it comes from that fruit or that pod. And then it can be, a million different things.
When most people think of chocolate, they probably think of what are referred to in the States, I think it is in part of the regulations around labeling, as candy bars. So the kind of things that when you're in a supermarket, as you're walking out, you would have you have a whole lot of different ones down there, but the Kit Kats and Quicks and Marathon, what do they call that? Snickers, yes. Mm-hmm. And all of those kind of things. And that's kind of stretching it to call those chocolate, is it not?
I would say, because the additions, to the chocolate that make it that product are things like sugar, additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, sometimes colors, artificial sweeteners, refined or hydrogenated oils. So a lot is added to the chocolate to make it what we think of, as we're buying like a candy bar.
Right. So we're talking about modern day candy bars, or what some people refer to as chocolate there. But chocolate has quite a history, does it not?
It does, yeah. So the first evidence of cacao dates back about over 5,000 years in or around Ecuador. And traces have been found on their pottery, so suggesting it was maybe used as a drink first. So and then but now the cacao tree is grown in tropical regions all over the world, but that's kind of where it's thought to have started. And many cultures like the ancient Mayans, Aztecs used cacao for medicinal purposes and have been doing that for centuries. So that's kind of where it started a long time ago.
So speaking of medicinal purposes, a few years ago, it started being rolled around through the chattering classes across newspaper headlines that chocolate was good for you. And people kind of took that to heart and imagined they could just gorge themselves on chocolate. But it's not quite as simple as that. None of these kind of things ever are. But let's talk about what kind of chocolate. Not all chocolates are born the same, as we've already kind of mentioned. What kind of chocolate is good for you?
Yeah. So the unsweetened raw version of the cocoa or cacao is thought to have the most, health benefits. So
Right.
things like polyphenols, which is a type of antioxidant,
Yeah.
and that fights free radicals. So you can kind of think of it as keeping our bodies from rusting. There's a good amount of magnesium in cacao, which about a third of Canadians and about half of Americans are deficient in magnesium. So that's, these are some of the things I think that people hear like, oh, antioxidants, magnesium. It's also high in minerals like
Mm.
manganese,
Is-
phosphorus, potassium, iron, zinc. And then because of all of that, it can do a lot of things. So it can help fight inflammation and oxidative stress, like I mentioned. It can support cardiovascular health. It can support improved mood. And isn't that funny? Like a lot of times when we're down, right, we just want some chocolate and it makes us feel better. And there's
Not
actually
me, but
like
I've heard this is the case with some people. So,
yeah, there's actually a real connection.
yeah.
There's some evidence that it can support brain health and cognitive health. It can
Right.
lower blood pressure, even reduce diabetes risks. So there's a lot of benefits that, can come. But like we talked about, where it can go wrong is grabbing that chocolate bar at the, checkout counter thinking you're going to get all these benefits when really the things like sugar and those additives and stuff are offsetting the benefits so much that but you're really not getting the benefits.
Rewinding a little bit, you mentioned manganese there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is manganese not integral to the production of collagen in the skin?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So that if you're wanting to maintain one's relative youth, these kind of chocolates could
Yeah.
perhaps be of benefit, shall we say?
Yes, and again, just watching out, like reading the ingredient label, watching out for the high sugar content. The other thing that tends to, I don't even want to say sneak in because it's really
Mm-hmm.
abundant in chocolate, is dairy.
Yep.
A significant portion of the population is lactose intolerant. So, milk chocolate, chocolate milk, hot chocolate pastries are kind of a double whammy because you get that sugar and you get the dairy,
Yes.
which can
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
inflammatory for people, and really offset any of those benefits that you're going to get. So there's ways to look for chocolate as far as like reading the ingredient label that will help you if you're looking for the health benefits. So it'll kind of help you determine whether, which way the scale is tipping. But the first thing is if the first ingredient is sugar, avoid it. And that happens a lot. I mean, even in a pure chocolate bar, a lot of times you'll notice sugar and then chocolate, sugar and then cacao, as the ingredient. So that's definitely going to be too much sugar and it's going to offset the benefits. So you want to look for products that are at least 70% cacao. And if it doesn't say it, it's much less than that. I can almost guarantee you because chocolate companies that have a high percentage of that cacao are so proud of it, they're going to put it on the label. So you can look for 70%, cacao, 80, 85%, but I'd say sticking over that 70% is going to be, give you the most benefits. And then avoiding that ingredient list that we just discussed. So if you're seeing those hydrogenated oils, if you're seeing artificial sweeteners, and that's a trick or, something to consider. Just because sugar's not the first ingredient, maybe it's got an artificial sweetener in there, which is probably less good for you than you should just have the sugar. So those are some things to keep in mind.
I always like to get kind of personal with you on a certain level with these kind of interviews. So, I'll be honest about the kind of chocolate that I grew up on, which I still have a soft spot for. What kind of chocolate or chocolate candy did you grow up on?
So my mom was like a 70s granola mom. So we actually ate carob.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
my mom tried to do that with, but it gave my sister and I such bad gas that we should cut that off.
so we liked it, but we didn't love it. Like we would take it if that was the only, my brother and I, we would take it if that was the only option. But we certainly didn't prefer it to chocolate. So that was kind of how we got chocolate or something like
Right.
chocolate. And then on, Halloween and,
Yeah, I was about to
our
say,
birthdays
yeah.
and stuff like that, we would get, regular candy and it was such a treat. But we were definitely, I think, the oddball family, right? Because it's like carob, who's eating carob?
Just excuse my ignorance here. What is carob exactly? Because I can remember those little carob nubs that my mum used to put into kind of homemade cookies and things.
Yeah, so it's actually part of the legume family. So
No,
it's a plant-based, form that is like when roasted, has somewhat of a chocolate flavor to it.
hence the flatulence. Yes, that's of course, of
Oh
course.
my, that makes perfect sense.
So I grew up on a diet. I mean, not that my mum fed this stuff to me, but I would spend my lunch money on chocolate, and I'd eat Mars bars and Twix and all of that kind of garbage. And I still have a soft spot for some of that. Now and again, about once a month, I'll buy one of those and then have it with my tea in the morning, as I said. But the reason I asked this question is, when did you make the transition to the healthier chocolate with that content of over 70%? Because I know for a fact that if you grew up on that kind of crappy chocolate I was talking about, that 70% does not taste very pleasant to you because it is quite bitter.
Yes. Yeah. And, it's so funny because I definitely at one point in time would have told you I'll never have dark chocolate because milk
Oh,
chocolate
really?
was so
Yeah.
sweet and luscious and creamy. But it was really when I started just to make more overall health conscious decisions
Mm-hmm.
and I knew dark chocolate was a little bit better and there was more benefits. And then I started having it. And I think as with a lot of things, my taste buds changed. And so now I'm very satisfied with a dark chocolate where I wouldn't have thought I would have been, or maybe even wouldn't have been, 20 years ago. So it's one of those things where it does, your taste buds change. And that, because it is bitter. So, but so are like, there's greens, right? Like
Yeah, of
kale
course.
or bitter greens that,
Rapini.
are bitter
Yes.
and certain like, there are actually things called bitters. So that is a flavor profile that some people enjoy and that does mature as you get older.
Yeah.
So kids especially, I would keep this in mind, parents, like if your kids don't love dark chocolate, don't give up on it. They may just develop that, appreciation for bitter as they get older, just like all
Right.
of
That
us.
makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. I just knew it was healthier. So I kind of just tried to incorporate it. And now I really like it. So, and I was trying to avoid dairy as well. So that was a big thing. If you don't get milk chocolate, it's really dark chocolate is one of the only options. So I was like, well, that's what I'll take, dairy
Right.
free. And so then you just kind of grow to like, I think, what's available and what makes your body feel good.
Now, there is quite a difference between UK chocolate, European chocolate, Canadian chocolate, and US chocolate. I'm talking about commercial chocolate at this point. So let's say a bar of dairy milk, shall we say. So that's actually, I think that's made by Hershey's now. But chocolate has always been quite different. And that's all to do with the history of chocolate making throughout Europe, throughout the UK, Canada, and into the States. And I was reading something quite interesting today. Many people from the UK and from Europe, when they taste American commercial chocolate, will say that it tastes like baby sick to them. I'm not sure if you've heard this or not before. And it does have a very particular kind of bitter tanginess that's quite akin to like quite a raspy parmesan, like a cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it smells like sick. So and tastes that way, and that can actually be a source of revulsion for many people not used to it. But the story behind that is quite fascinating, and that's to do with when chocolate I think it was in the 20s became very popular in the US. A lot of the dairy was nowhere near, unlike Britain, which is a small island, the dairy was nowhere near these chocolate producing factories. So, and there was basically no refrigerated transport at that time. So the way around that is they would safely sour the milk and then transport it to the factories to be made into chocolate. With this came butyric acid, that kind of sour note that one gets in that kind of chocolate. So when we came into the modern age, this particular taste of that purposely soured milk, the butyric acid, it kind of disappeared. But that was what the American populace craved, that flavor. That was what was chocolate for them. So to this day, butyric acid is added as a flavor component to give chocolate that kind of cheesy tanginess. And that's why it tastes so different. I'm unsure about the use of butyric acid in Canada. I'm going to have to do some research on that. But I thought that was kind of interesting history lesson about chocolate.
Definitely. Isn't that odd? Like what we get accustomed to,
Yes,
and like
exactly.
then what the difference is. Like that's so interesting, because if you would tell that story to somebody who had never had chocolate in the United States, they'd be like, no, thank you.
Yes.
But like people love it, right?
Yeah. And then I know that works inversely as well. So when people come over to the UK and they have a bar of dairy milk, it feels too fatty and greasy to them. It's not quite as hard and waxy, and doesn't have that kind of rancid butter characteristic.
Yeah.
Anyway, fascinating stuff.
Oh
So
my gosh.
when I go to the store, apart from the cocoa content, what should I be looking for? Just a lack of other ingredients, right?
Yeah, it's really like what you don't want in there. So it
Right.
really, however it's sweetened, and then there are chocolates that are sweetened with, pure maple syrup and honey. I mean, those are going to be ideal, but even like a raw cane sugar is fine. It just, that percentage is important, so you're getting the benefits. And then, yeah, avoiding those ingredients that we talked about, the artificial sweeteners and emulsifiers and oils and things like that. The other thing that I usually tell people too is if you can shop for fair trade chocolate, that's a really positive thing. This just ensures fair prices are paid to the farmers growing the cacao. And how that started was back in the 90s, about 90% of the cocoa farms, or the cocoa used in chocolate industry, was produced on small family farms.
Right.
And so most of these growers, didn't know where their product was even ending up, or what it was actually worth. So they were accepting really low prices. And that would lead to things like labor shortages, child labor, poor working conditions, poverty level living conditions. So fair trade just lets you know as the consumer that your money is going back to the farmers so that they can live, a fair and lovely, life out of poverty, and get, paid fairly for the crop that they're growing. So if at all you can look for fair trade, that's just like a nice, like, heartfelt thing to do. And, good for the community, good for the growers.
I should have asked you this earlier. When you're talking about the cocoa solids percentage in the chocolate, is that the combination of the cocoa butter, so the fat, and the dry cocoa?
Yeah, it can be. And usually it'll be listed, like in the ingredients, it'll be listed separately if they use cocoa butter and like cacao, but the percentage will be a combination of that.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know, because I wasn't quite sure if that was the truth there or not. Jill, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution once again. I would like to tell you that I'm craving chocolate, but I'm going to leave that for tomorrow morning. I'll try and find something that's a little bit higher in the cocoa content rather than the usual garbage I eat. But Jill, thank you very much once again. We will see you next month, and bye for now.